Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. A book was recently recommended to me by a recurring guest on the show, Jim Valiant, who's also a friend of mine. The book was called Magenta, and it was an absolutely wonderful book, and I recommend it to anybody listening. And today we're lucky enough to have the book's author with us. But not only is he the author of Magenta, but he's also a bookseller, statistical analyst, managing editor of the Muse video database. And he started writing novels at 12. And if that's not enough, he also helped to popularize the term mullet. So, Warren Fahy, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael.
So you seem to have had an awful lot of absolutely amazing experiences and a wide range of interest and education. So before we get into the book, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your early education and maybe even your later education?
Well, sure. I decided early on that every single job I got was going to somehow contribute to my writing career because at the age of 12, I knew I wanted to be a novelist. So, and I wrote three novels before I was out of high school. So, what I did after high school was got a job at a bookstore and became manager of the bookstore when I was 19. From there, I went to a publishing company. I worked there as a statistical analyst at Peterson Publishing Company. And then they do Hot Rod and Teen Magazine, just like a billion magazines. And then from there, I got a job as a word processor in college and lied my way into the job. At that time, word processors were not something you could have at home. They were only business dedicated. And so I went in at a secretarial service near the college where I was going, and they said, "Well, do you know how to operate a Lexitron 3000?" I said, "Yes, I do." I got the job, and a few months later, the boss said, "You never knew how to do this, did you?" And I said, "Yeah, but I know now." And from there, I got a job at the Century Plaza Hotel, where the President of the United States stays, and as a word processor there, learning the Wang system. And so I did all kinds of secretarial work for movie stars and everybody else who stayed at the hotel. And then from there, I got a job as an editor, a data entry editor for a movie database, and became managing editor of that group and database designer. And then from there, went on to do that for five companies total, doing the same thing in that business, making movie databases, finally books databases and music databases, which are used all over the internet. So I wrote probably 30,000 descriptions of movies and videos personally. And so if you see at Rotten Tomatoes, you see a description of a movie, there's a good chance I wrote it. So that was all of those things were contributing obviously to doing that. And then I got a job after that writing Red Dead Revolver for Rockstar Games, which was the first video game that led to the Red Dead Redemption series, and that was the first time they had hired anybody outside Rockstar to write it because they're British guys who own the company, and they weren't comfortable doing a Western cowboy idiom, so they hired me to do it, and did the story, did the people call it the most famous line in video log history was the last line in the video game, which was "It never was about the money." I wrote that, and then that was a big success. And then I went from there to writing comedy routines for robots in Hong Kong for a company called Wowie Robotics, and that was incredible, a lot of fun. But so every single one of the jobs I chose in some way was contributing to my education as a writer and as somebody hands on in editing, publishing, bookstores, etc. So,
So at 12 years old, you knew you wanted to be a writer. Why? Why did you want to be a writer? And how did you know at such a young age?
well, I started a fantasy novel at the age of 12, and I wrote it on this tiny little uh, tablet that I could keep in my pocket. and I wrote in tiny little letters. And I wrote about 75 pages of this novel, and I kept it in my pocket. My mother threw my pants into the washing machine, and it came out as a big wad of paper mache.
Oh,
And so at that point, I decided either I'm going to be a writer and I'm going to redo this from the beginning, or I'm just going to give up. And I decided I was going to do it. And I wrote it all over again. And from that point forward, it taught me that, you've got to be dedicated. And I knew that it didn't matter how long it was going to take, but I was already dedicated to getting there. So I would get there because I was young enough that if it took me till I was 90 years old, I would still make it.
wow. Who influenced you as far as literature goes? What authors inspired
Oh,
you?
God. Oh, so many. Along the way, I mean, there's been more and more. I would say initially, people like Tolkien and Heinlein and um, Isaac Asimov, the Foundation trilogy, uh, Dune, and Jerry Pournelle and Larry Niven, all these great science fiction and fantasy authors. Um, and I'm sure there's many more that I haven't, thought of at the top of my head. But along the way, people like Martin Amis, and was a spectacular writer, and of course Michael Crichton. People say, oh, that's simplistic writing. Well, nobody has been able to just do that. It's a very specific way of writing a book that focuses on the action instead of on the writing style, so that you are looking through a window. You don't even notice the writer. You're there, and that is hard to do. A lot of writers want to, throw in flourishes and stuff. I called the style I did for Fragment and Pandemonium, my science thrillers, Windex, which which is like you can't see me. You're there, and that is a difficult thing to do. In fact, they get thousands of HarperCollins in London told me that they got thousands of wannabe Crichton novels every single year, and they asked me, "How did you do it? How did you're the only one who was able to do it?" And I said, "Well," and this was from the editor of Michael Crichton, who was at the party there at HarperCollins in London when I arrived. And I said, well, he was a great instructor. I mean, as while I was trying to write those novels, I realized how difficult that really is. And people can underestimate Michael Crichton's skill, but it took me years and years, decades, in fact, of writing different kinds of novels to appreciate how much went into that. And so he was another Tom Wolfe. I mean, another great one. I would say, oh my goodness, but a wide range. Shakespeare, everyone, it goes into it. So you just keep throwing things into the hopper and turning them over, and more great stuff will come out.
And like I said, Magenta is a wonderful book. Without giving away the entire thing, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. It's the story that it's I think extremely important for right now. It's about how high tech trillionaires in the future, as our dollar continues to be inflated, they become trillionaires instead of billionaires. And But they have developed the most penetrating surveillance and modern monitoring and censoring uh, uh, technology in the world, and have sold it to the worst dictators and governments everywhere in order to control everyone. And yet these two tech titans, we might say, have built into each of their products a backdoor key, which can turn all of it off with one device called free will, which they trade between them each year. And someday they hope and they plan to flip this switch and disarm all of these governments at the same time, and give the human race a chance to reemerge from under this tyranny. Um, but one of them decides he's more in love with the machine than he is with people. because he thinks people need the machine to be controlled. And so the other one, his wife, who's the other robotics genius, decides that she's going to hide this device with a random person on Earth, and that at the right time, when there's a window of opportunity to flip the switch, this person will flip that switch, and her husband will not be able to find him, even with all of the technology they have, the surveillance technology they have, to locate him before that happens.
So you mentioned that this is the right time for this book. First of all, why do you say it's the right time? And second, not everybody agreed, right? When you're trying to get this thing out there. So what, like I said, why was it important to write this now, and how could anybody object to this being the right time? What were the problems that they
Oh,
had with it?
oh yes. Well, I mean, you tell me. I offered this to my publisher who published Pandemonium, Macmillan, and they said, "Well, it's well done, but we don't think it's the right time for a dystopian novel." I mean, I think that at that particular precise moment that I got that response, George Orwell's 1984 was number one at Amazon Books. So it was a 70-year-old novel was beating every single other book that the publishers were now newly releasing. So if that wasn't enough of a signal to them that this is the right time for a dystopian novel, I don't know what is. But that's how people feel, and the book has not been able to get any notoriety or any kind of visibility because I published it myself. And there's no apparatus for recognizing a book that's published by an author, so except this kind of a platform right here. So
I find it absolutely stunning that somebody would think this isn't the right time. I mean, the book contains the unholy alliance between big tech and government, which is very apropos right now. Inflation, which is, everybody's dealing with that now. And not only that, but whereas 1984 is a pure dystopian novel where there's no real hero in the book. I mean, the main character isn't like somebody that's inspiring, but Rory Green and his friends are absolutely inspiring characters. I mean, they're very inspirational. They're individualists, and they're just likable, and you're rooting for them in a way that I didn't root for Winston when I read 1984. He just, he was more of a plain character. I mean, I haven't read it; it's probably been 15 years, but still, I don't remember being excited about him. Whereas I was excited for Rory Green and Macmillan. They didn't see that, huh?
I guess not. And I totally agree with you about 1984. It's bleak and hopeless, and I don't write novels like that. It's because I believe the human spirit is not going to be defeated, or is defeatable by machines. But that's what the whole book is about. Is about uh, how everyone should um, take some hope from the characters in the midst of a 1984 like dystopian uh, tyranny, that the hope comes from you, and you have to reach inside, believe in yourself, do not compromise, do not give up, do not render yourself to all of the pressure around you to conform.
As an aside, you mentioned how difficult it is to get publicity for a self-published book, and I actually feel it made me feel a little good in a way because I mean, you're a best-selling author, and if you can't even gain traction with a self-published book, it explains to me why I've been unable to, because
Yeah,
it's not an easy task at all.
no, it's not, and especially when the book itself is something that I have been so censored and deboosted and tagged ever since this book came out, that I was ghost banned on Twitter, for instance, and I would send a reply to Amy Peikoff, and she would not be able to see it, And she
Wow.
actually, and it would just say, this post cannot be seen, and it can't be replied to, it can't be, liked, it can't be anything. And so she saw for herself what was happening to me, and she reposted and said, look, I follow this person, I want to see this person. Nope. There are 22 million lines of code in the Twitter algorithm, and there's no reason for 22 million lines of code except for zeroing and doing exactly what the book Magenta is about. Zeroing in and finding those people who have wrongthink and tagging them with all kinds of weights and deboosting and shadow banning and things so that people can't see them. And it got to the point where I had about 1,000 people following me, and maybe one or two people could see my posts. So it's a machine that is enforcing uh, a kind of a deboosting of those who. That's where the whole magenta is a code, a color coding of people. And if they go off the track of what they're supposed to think and say and be, then they go from purple through all the colors in the spectrum and finally arrive at magenta, which is where they're erased and they can't be seen anywhere. And that's why the novel's named Magenta, and that's what's really happening. I mean, I saw it happen to myself. Certain
Wow.
posts are deboosted. People are deboosted.
Now, are they doing that to you, do you think, because of this particular book, because it warns of the dangers of tech being involved with government?
No, undoubtedly, yeah.
Oh, wow. So the book, in addition, I mean, it's a really good book and a good, nice story to read. It's great, but it's also fueled by what I find to be sound philosophy and political theory. Who's influenced you philosophically and politically? I mean, it's obviously you're informed about these subjects. It shows in the book.
Oh, certainly. It's funny. I had already started writing and was writing Crimson when I was 12 years old, and people would continuously come up to me and say, "You should read Ayn Rand." Um, and I had not heard of her, and I was okay, all right, and it was a little annoying actually as a writer to be people continuously telling you should read somebody else. But I did finally in junior high school, and I went, okay, I agree. I agree with her on so many things, and of course uh, Victor Hugo and Heinlein and Aristotle. There are so many, which is reflected in the book, and it's there's one of the scenes of Rory Green in a high school class has somebody trying to tag him with like saying, "Who? It sounds to me like you're influenced by this person, right?" And he cuts them off and says, "No, stop that. Stop personifying ideas. Stop trying to connect me to somebody who is already magenta so that you can reject me. Think about what I am saying instead. Don't do that." That's what the whole book is saying, is that each of us has an individual mind.
Wow, that's deep. I don't know that I got that. I might have missed it. Wow, I'm kind of ashamed of myself. Because that is powerful. Because I've dealt a lot with that throughout my life, where I'd be in a debate with somebody and they'll say, "Oh, well, I can tell you just got this from such and such." And regardless of whether it was true or not, it was irrelevant to what I'm
Hmm?
saying. It's what I'm saying is either true or it isn't true, and it doesn't matter who else has said it.
Right. It's
You know
never
what I
done
mean?
for the right reasons.
Oh,
It's basically to derail and turn an idea into an ad hominem attack on a particular source. And if that source has already been tagged with all kinds of negativity, then just connect it to that, and we're done with the ideas. So and that was done to me as I was growing up. I would say something, "Oh, you're just saying Ayn Rand, or you're just saying this," and it was a way of dismissing thinking about anything that I had said, whether it actually had been inspired by Rand or anyone else. Yeah.
And you're 13, 14 years old when this is happening?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. In fact, I knew James Valiant at that age, and his home was a parlor of philosophical discussion uh, with his father. It was like like uh, some sort of Greek uh,
Like a
symposium.
salon?
Right, right,
Wow.
and it was so we were constantly talking philosophy in every way, and so very, very engaged in ideas from a very early age. Yeah.
See, I'm so envious of that. I mean, at 14, 15 years old, all I was doing was getting in trouble. And it took going, it took going to prison, in my 20s to really become interested in ideas. And so I always feel as if I'm way behind the curve. You know what I mean? Because I started so late. It doesn't mean I can't learn. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that I realized that I wasted. You get in this country, you get a free 13-year education that I didn't take advantage of. Whereas guys like you and Jim not only had that, but then you have these meetings where you're having these discussions. So do you see yourself in Rory Green at all? Like, did you ever deal with the type of peer pressure that he deals with in the book when you were a kid?
Yes, I did, and certainly, and but I was a lot more. I didn't care. It rolled off my back, and I wanted to express for people who are affected by that pressure, and especially looking forward as the pressure has gotten greater and greater and greater since that time when I was younger. Now the whole school is just awash, in this constant political drowning indoctrination of political ideas. And if you don't agree, you're just ostracized. So that was what I had imagined and envisioned years before this actually took place and happened in our schools and universities, because this book has been percolating. The first draft of this book was written when I was 17 years old in high school. So I revisited it every decade in order, and as a result of that, was able to add another layer of society to the microcosm of Middletown that was a different age. His parents, the politicians, more and more layers of the society around Rory Green were added over those years. And so, and as that was happening, and I was projecting where it could go in a cautionary way, how it could become more and more tyrannical, the world just kept catching up to the book. In tyranny, it got worse and worse, and I kept trying to stay ahead of it and stay ahead of it. And finally, I was like, I got to release this before we're in a totalitarian
Yeah,
dictatorship.
before it's true, before everything's
Yeah,
right, right.
you're
Wow.
right, right.
So, where does that strength of character come from? Like, Rory Green had this strength of character to not cave to the peer pressure, to be himself regardless of obstacles. And obviously, you had that too. Was it innate inside you? Did you have to use sort of self talk to guide you through it? How do you have that as a 14-year-old kid when everybody's giving into peer pressure? Everyone's dressing a certain way to get fit in with this crowd or that crowd. How do you do that? Like, if you have, I guess what I'm asking is, if you had a 14-year-old kid come to you and he wants to be a writer and he wants to be an individual and he says, how did you do it? What do you tell him?
Well, that's it's you're asking me to kind of get outside of the monad, the essence of myself, and somehow look back at it. I think that you certainly need to believe your own eyes. You need to be told by somebody that you should believe your own eyes, your own mind, and that there is no content to just simply agreeing with other people, because that doesn't mean anything. You're just deferring to other people's brains. You're not agreeing with anything because you haven't thought it through yourself. And you have to think things through from the basis of what you know, what you've experienced, what you've seen with your senses about reality. And if it adds up to a conclusion somebody else has given you, then you can say, I agree with that. But otherwise, you're just saying, okay, you think about it, I won't.
So if you could sum it up in one sentence, it would be, or one statement: think for yourself.
That's it.
Think for yourself. Wow. So, are all of your novels political, philosophical? This is the only one I've read so far. The
Oh,
other
they're all
ones,
philosophical.
yeah,
Yeah, they're all philosophical, on at least some levels, and some completely. Like the core is, somebody handed me the Bhagavad Gita in an airport, and they said, "Oh, you can have this for free, but you should give us a donation." I said, "Can I have it for free?" And they're like, "Oh, we'd like a donation." I said, "But you just said I could have it for free." So I got the book. I read it. I was so appalled. It was the most evil thing I'd ever read in my entire life. I thought it was more evil than any religion that I've
really,
ever, and I've studied, as you know, I'm a
yeah,
co-author of Creating Christ. And so I immediately wrote the core about it and why it's evil and explained it in a story so you could see exactly how those ideas destroy life. And so that book is my polemical response to the Bhagavad Gita. But other books, they're, the philosophical messages are lower and at a deeper level. But yeah, they all have some kind of a meaningful, some meaning to convey about how to look at the world, which is all philosophy is. So,
right. And Creating Christ, you guys started working on what when you were teenagers?
in our early 20s, yeah.
And that, what was that experience like? I mean, you're researching all this ancient stuff. I mean, I'd imagine you did some traveling too. It must have been a great experience.
It was a long, wonderful experience. We didn't do a lot of traveling except to like nearby university libraries or something like that. Um, but it was something that both of us. I had been already writing novels about religion, about what it does to our brains and how we think about things. Both of us were Christians, very avid Christians when we were very young. When like 8 years old, so, on until about 10 or 11, and that's when we saw that what was happening, um, to our minds, by being religious. My father told me, he was disappointed when I converted at 8 years old to Christianity. He said, "An open Bible is a closed mind." And I was like, "Whoa, okay, let me think about that, Dad. Thanks." And it continuously opened my mind until finally it was open, at the age of 10 or 11, 12. And so, yeah, it's religion was already on our plate, and as we realized that it was something that could infect the brains of everyone and wipe out their individual reason, their ability to see the world around them for themselves and to make conclusions from nature itself instead of just from some secondhand thing that has been given to them to believe. So, from then, so as soon as James was clerking at a big law firm downtown Los Angeles, and he was going to the library and researching Christianity at the time, and he had an insight, a eureka moment, and so he crawled through, into my apartment, which is right on the street with no locks on the doors. It's like in almost in Diogenes wine barrel. Um, and he just and my friends could come in at any time, and they always did. So I was sleeping. He came in and he woke me up, and we talked about it for about 3 hours till 3 in the morning. And so the thesis, what he had discovered, and you can read it in the book in Creating Christ, implied something monumental about Christianity and about its origins. And from that point, we had a pretty clear idea of what it meant, of what this discovery meant. And it took 30 over 30 years to research it and to finally find the smoking gun evidence that proved we were right.
That's awesome. I haven't read it yet. I plan on it. I did see the documentary though, and I found it absolutely fascinating. You said something a minute or so ago about sort of the it's not your terminology, but it's how I interpret it, is the collectivized thinking that is inherent in religion. And it reminded me of a friend of mine that I mentored while I was incarcerated. And I had him, read a lot of books. Ayn Rand, Stephen Hicks, a lot of good stuff. The main influence was Ayn Rand, no doubt about it. But other, philosophers, psychologists, and an old Muslim guy accused me basically of turning him, my friend, into a clone of me. And I responded, and I said, "Wait a second. You go to a service every week where you all bow and pray at the same time that a billion other people on the planet do as well, but yet you're accusing me of making somebody a clone."
Yeah, good point.
The stuff that I'm having him read tells him to think for himself, use reason, look at reality. The stuff you're having him read or want him to read tells him to have faith in some mystical being. And so when you just said that, it really struck a chord for me. That's a keen insight that it really is collectivized thinking.
Mhm.
Before I let you go, I've got to ask you about the mullet, because
Oh,
when I'm talking, I was talking to Jim Valiant, and he says, "Yeah," he says, "Warren, he created the concept of the mullet," and I'm like, get out of here, the mullet." And he says, "Go ahead and Google it." And so I went and Googled it, and sure enough. So first of all, like, how that? Just tell us the story. I don't even know how to
okay.
ask the question. How are you involved with the mullet?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Thank you for asking the question. A dear friend of mine who just passed away, unfortunately, last week, who I went to high school with, was the real. His name is Bob Mack, and he was the real reason that the mullet exists as a word that everybody understands to mean this hairstyle today. It was entered into the Oxford English Dictionary for all eternity. It will be part of the English language because of Bob Mack, my friend. And he became editor in chief of Grand Royal Magazine, which was the Beastie Boys magazine, back in the 90s. And so he made some legendary issues of that magazine. And the Beastie Boys had come up with the term originally mullet in a lyric of one of their songs where they refer to a mullet head. Okay. And so Mike D of the Beastie Boys told my friend Bob Mack, we want this word to stick. We want it to describe this hairstyle of short in the front and long in the back. And we want everybody to understand that this should be called a mullet. And so he went about doing that, and he wrote this incredible issue of Grand Royal Magazine that had mostly his articles and him displaying all the different people who had worn the mullet, from David Bowie to Florence Henderson, just everybody involved, and carefully chronicled all of it. And he tapped me to write the ancient history of the mullet, taking it all the way back to the Phoenicians and the Sumerians to the present day. And so Mike D had obtained an old book from the 1930s that was a history of hairstyles going back to the cave era. And so that was given to me, like, here, use this reference, right? So I wrote this one article, which was the illustrated history of the mullet going back um, to the days when we were apes, to the present, and that was incorporated into this cover story, this suite of articles that Bob Mack put together for Grand Royal Magazine, mulling over the mullet. And it caught on. Everybody started using the word mullet to describe that hairstyle, and it spread everywhere, and like wildfire. And the next thing you know, when I was doing it, I was in the office as a managing editor of these video databases, and the people around, I was just like faxing my article back and forth to Bob at Grand Royal. And they were like, "What in the world are you doing? What is that?" And I was like, "Well, we're trying to get this hairstyle named a mullet." They were like, "What? What are you talking about? Mullet? That's a fish, isn't it? What the heck?" And we were like, "No, no, no, no. Believe me, we're trying to get this name put on this hairstyle." And probably 5 people in the world didn't think we were crazy because they were involved in doing it too. Everyone else thought we were absolutely nuts. And so then it came out, and then next thing you know, I'm hearing people all over the place using. I can't go a day without somebody using the word mullet. And it was finally included in the Oxford English Dictionary. And if you want to hear the history of that, there's a Slate magazine podcast called The History of the Mullet,
Really?
and I'm interviewed on it, and they ask me some of the same questions you're asking, and that's out there, so anybody can Google it and listen to the whole history.
That is absolutely wonderful. Like, that's fantastic. The like out of all, like, who would think that, like, such a thing, like, to help create the word mullet or popularize the word mullet? That's freaking awesome, dude. Wow.
Well, if I had a nickel for every time somebody used that word, I'll tell you, I'd be a rich man.
Too bad you don't get paid for use royalties, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. All right, Warren. Is there anything that I didn't ask about you or about your writings that you think that I should have asked or that you'd like to say?
No, I think you asked great questions, and I think that that's just enough to whet the appetite, hopefully, of people to read Magenta, because you're not going to see a book like that maybe ever again.
No,
I'll
it's a
tell you right
great book.
now.
Great book.
I, Thank you. I don't think that 1984 could get published today, to tell you the truth, and I don't think
Wow.
Atlas Shrugged could get published. I don't think We the Living could get published. I don't think Anthem could get published. I don't think Brave New World could get published. I think that the publishers in a certain way have become gatekeepers of this, just like internet, social networks, social media companies. They're all involved in doing this social engineering and the social censorship and suppressing of certain ideas that are considered to be canceled.
Is there? I didn't plan on asking this, but now I want to. Is there anything that can be done, like in those of us that want to read this type of material, that want free speech, that want a free exchange of ideas? Is there anything that we can do? Is there a
Yeah.
movement that can be started? I mean, what can be done about this?
Well, I mean, certainly, first of all, acknowledging it. This is going on. There's a great danger in converting paper printed books into the cloud. People are already talking about rewriting 1984 to be more politically correct, which is the most ironic, self-refuting, ridiculous idea you could even imagine. But they're thinking about it. They're talking about it. And if people's copies are only in the cloud, then they can do that, and they can change something that you think is the original. And so you need to have paper copies of books that are important. Um, the digital world, as is explained in Magenta, is infinitely malleable and changeable, and you can count things improperly. How many people really looked at your post? They can edit that. They can change that with an algorithm. I did it for search algorithms for 5 databases. I know what I'm talking about. Very easy to do. And so if you want to use that power in order to drive people in a certain direction, you can easily do that. And so that's the danger of it. So people have to be aware first that that's going on, and then they have to at least try to express themselves until they get shut down and branded Magenta. That's what the book is about, right?
Awesome, Warren. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Wonderful to have you on. Where can people find you? Where can they find your books?
Well, they can find Magenta at Amazon, and that's the one place that you're able to get it. But all over the world, and in paperback and in Kindle. My other books, you can get at any bookstore. So, uh, yeah, or Amazon or anywhere else. Yeah,
And you have a website, right?
I do. Yeah, warrenfahy.com. That's Fahy. Right.
Yeah, when I was reading about you on the internet, they said there's multiple pronunciations of your name depending on whether you're Irish or you're here or you're there. I said, wow.
Yeah, there are, and I've come across people with the same name. They say it Fahy or Fahy. My family says it Fay.
Oh, you're a fascinating guy with a fascinating name. Well, thanks again. Really, really appreciate it. For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Leibowitz. Remember, let me know what you think. Share your comments. Thank you very much for joining us.